Hello everyone, it's me, Garrett, and it is almost the end of February, which means it's time for our monthly video. This one is going to be over the Tin Woodman of Oz. It is the 12th book in the series. I always think it's the 13th, and I don't really know why that is, but I always want to call it the 13th book. But it is the 12th book in the series. It is also celebrating its 100th birthday this year, so that's kind of fun. So I hope everyone's had a good February. It timed perfectly to be, the Tin Woodman, given the discussion of hearts and such. So this one, was one of my favorites, and I enjoyed it a lot as a kid, and I still enjoyed it as an adult. This is the edition I read. It's a 1920s edition. So it's Riley and Lee, not Riley and Britton. It does have all the color plates, though. As well as really lovely end papers. Look at those end papers. Look at those. Aren't they lovely? There's Glinda, and Dorothy, and Scarecrow, and Ozma, and Tin Man, and Polychrome, and the Wizard, and Jack Pumpkinhead, and Scraps, and I'm thinking that's probably Button Bright, and I'm assuming one of those is probably Trot and Betsy Bobbin, but I'm genuinely not too sure. But that would be my guess. But aren't they just lovely? Anyhow. So Tin Woodman of Oz, was actually one of the was actually the biggest seller since really Patchwork Girl. Largely attributed to the fact that with World War I being in full swing, people looked back at the nostalgia of their youth. So not only did this one sell very well, but it actually bumped the sales of previous books too. So Tin Woodman overall was a categorical success. It also featured one of the most popular characters as the title character. And indeed, he and the Scarecrow are the two biggest characters throughout this book. It's your general sort of quest book. It does do a lot. It does follow your standard sort of bomb milieu, if you will, of you have character decides they're going to go do something. They go through a whole bunch of adventures prior to the doing something. They do the something, and 2 seconds later, it's over, party in Emerald City. I mean, it's the standard formula here. And one of the things that I sort of realized as I was reading through this, looking back at my own, I guess, a little bit of cynicism to it, is for Baum, it's not so much about the reason behind the journey. It's about the journey. It's about what happens to you on the way. What your goal is incidental to the journey. This one doesn't introduce quite as many characters. It actually brings back a character from a previous book in a little more unusual and positive light. We also get some updates to the world of Oz itself in terms of its history, as well as more history of the Tin Woodman. So there's a lot that actually goes on in this book. In terms of the Oz mythos, this is probably this, and if you take this and Dorothy and the Wizard and Oz's versions of the history, that's probably where you would get the complete picture. Because as we all remember, the wizard had to be retconned in the 4th book, because he were a bad guy after book 2. So, continuing on. So we're introduced right away to Woot the Wanderer. And I'm not gonna lie, Woot's actually kind of attractive. That's Woot, right there on the first page. Not so attractive on the cover here. He looks like a 12-year-old here. I don't really understand how old Woot's supposed to be here. He looks like he's 16 or 17. God only knows. Baum's never very specific with ages. So, Woot the Wanderer arrives at the Tin Woodman's castle, and he's a wanderer because he likes to wander. Fairly self-explanatory there. And so he's invited in. The Scarecrow is visiting the Tin Woodman, as he does fairly regularly. And Woot asks his history. And so the Tin Woodman tells us the same basic story of Nimmy Amy from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The big exception being, it no longer is that she lived with her mother, who traded a goat and a cow to the witch to enchant the axe. She's actually a slave to the Witch of the East. And so Woot says, well, why did you never go back for her? And he said, well, unfortunately, the wizard gave me a heart that was kind, but not loving. And truth be told, he had kind of forgotten. But he realizes it is his duty to go back and marry Nimmy Amy if she wants to be married to him. So Scarecrow, Tin Woodman, and Woot begin their journey to the land of the Munchkins. And they debate going by Emerald City, but they decide, no, we're not going to go to Emerald City, because then everybody's going to get involved, and that would put Nimmy Amy on the spot, and that's really not what we want to do here. We want to give her the opportunity to tell me yes or no for herself. Which is very, to me at least, seemingly at odds with what society would have been at the time of, well, no, you must all go and make sure she says yes, because she is a woman and she should be delighted to marry you. Baum was a feminist. So they begin their journey, and they first, and so they decide they're going to go up through the north, through the Gillikin country. So first they discover the Loons of Lunville, who all have names that are varying puns on the word balloon. In fact, their king is Ball Loon. There is Pantaloon. There's Lady Loon. There's Till Loon. And they're these sort of round, jolly people who are inflated. And they pop very easily. And so that's how they're able to escape the loons, is by popping them. And so they then journey a little farther after they escape the loons and meet Mrs. Yoop. Now, you'll remember Mr. Yoop lives in a jail cell in Quadling Country from, I believe it's Patchwork Girl of Oz, where they encounter him. So this is his wife, who has been hiding in her castle since his capture. And she's very good with transformations, because she's a Yukuhu. And supposedly, Yukuhu magic cannot be broken by anybody. She wears this lace apron, and she manages... So after the friends break into her castle, because they're trying to find a place to stay for the night, she decides she will enchant them, much like she's enchanted Polychrome, the Rainbow's daughter, into being a canary. So the Scarecrow becomes a stuffed bear, the Tin Woodman becomes an owl, and poor Woot becomes a green monkey. There he is. So, they discover the secret of the apron, they're able to escape, they trap Mrs. Yoop, and they go along their way having a little bit more adventures. They encounter a jaguar who wants to eat them, but Polychrome convinces him not to. In the escape from the jaguar, Woot accidentally winds up underground and encounters some dragons that he has to escape from. They meet Tommy Quickstep, who was a messenger who foolishly wished, after helping a good fairy, that he had 20 legs to be able to do things faster, and got them. Fortunately, Polychrome is able to repair him. Let's see, there should be a picture of Tommy Quickstep through here. Yeah, good old Tommy Quickstep. And that is the last we see of Tommy Quickstep. Now, interestingly, sidebar here, let me grab the book for it. In Return to Oz, in that final scene, when Ozma's unearthed, they actually bring a whole bunch of famous Oz characters into that scene, one of which is Tommy Quickstep. So there's Tommy Quickstep as portrayed in Return to Oz. Fun little factoid there. The Frogman also shows up. Good old Frogman from Lost Princess. Shaggy Man is there. Polychrome is there. But it's literally blink and you miss it. Supposedly Glinda is in there, but no one's ever been able to find her. So after Tommy Quickstep, they discover they're well into Munchkinland by this point. They come across Ginger's ranch. You remember Ginger, don't you? The general who tried to take over Oz and then got in a lot of trouble, and then actually married a guy who we met in Ozma of Oz that got a black eye because he didn't do what she told him to. Well, apparently they've divorced. And Ginger now has a ranch, and she grows cream puffs and macaroons and other good desserts. So they encounter Ginger, and they sort of tell her of their plight, and she lets them stay overnight. Well, because it's Bomb's favorite thing to do, Dorothy, who, fun factoid, embroiders, so there's a fun similarity between Dorothy and I, as if there weren't already so many to begin with. Dorothy has been watching the magic picture, and she and Ozma set out to Ginger's ranch with the sawhorse to fix the matter. Now, Yukahu magic is truly strong, and this is actually the first time we see Ozma become more than just sort of a there figure. In this book, we learn that Oz was an ordinary country until the Fairy Queen Lurline flew over Oz, decided she liked it, and enchanted it to make it a fairyland, and then promptly forgot about it, and imbued Ozma with magic. Now, it still doesn't really clarify, oh, but there was King Pastoria, oh, there was this, there was that, da-da-da-da-da-da. Bomb is never going to resolve that. And I'll try to remember to come back to that in a few. Bomb will never resolve that, but now Ozma has been magically aged a little older than Dorothy, probably about 15, 16, where Dorothy's probably 12. And she now works her own magic and does a lot of really magical things with potions and powders and things like that. Now, the bright side for the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow is because Mrs. Yoop forgot to specify, she was able to change Tin Owl back into Tin Man, and Straw Bear back into Scarecrow. Because it was only the outward form that had changed. Transforming Polychrome was a little more difficult, but what she did was she converted her first from a canary to a dove, then to a speckled hen, then a rabbit into a fawn, and then with some stuff from there, she was able to change her from fawn to Polychrome. Unfortunately, Woot, they had the trouble with, because he had been changed fully. So what they ultimately realized and decided to do is Mrs. Yoop is still trapped in her castle without her magic apron. And so what they decide is they can transfer the shape of the green monkey onto her. But then from there, before they do that, what they have to do is change Mrs. Yoop into Woot the Wanderer's shape, and then change them back, trade them over. So Mrs. Yoop gets her own and becomes a green monkey, presumably for forever. Here's a lovely picture of Woot and Princess Ozma. So from there, Dorothy and Ozma decide they'll return to Emerald City. Dorothy had wanted to come along, but since she wasn't invited, decided that maybe she probably didn't, and it was kind of a dude's trip. Polychrome agrees to go on with them because she can't get home until a rainbow shows up. So she goes along with them. And on their way, they encounter another Tin Man. Except he's a soldier. And he's rusted. So they oil him up, and he explains that his name was Captain Fighter. And now he just goes by the Tin Soldier. And he, too, had fallen in love with Nimmy Amy. And unfortunately for him, while he didn't have an axe, he did have a sword. And the same fate that befell the Tin Woodman befell the Tin Soldier. So they decide they're going to go visit Ku-Klip, who is the tinsmith who made them both. And when they arrive at Ku-Klip's house, he's not there. And so they decide they're just going to go on in. From there, they start rooting around and discover that there are, some random things, including, rather horrifically, the Tin Woodman's head. And it's still sentient. Because, as is explained, nothing can die, even your separate individual pieces. Now, what can happen is your personality can be transferred into something else. So while Nick Chopper's head is sentient, he really doesn't remember anything or know who he is. He's just a random talking head in a cabinet. Which also then makes me go, well, does that mean that, and this is where we get into the conundrum, does that mean that the wildcat that Tin Woodman beheaded in the first book, its head is still sentient? Why did the Wicked Witch and why did the two Wicked Witches die? And so it opens up a whole mess of stuff. Which, of course, N-Bomb is never going to address, and we just have to accept that this is just the Oz books. There is a base continuity, but by and large, each book is on its own in terms of what it's going to come up with. Which may not work so well for modern readers, but it is part of what makes the Oz books, and makes them unique. So Ku-Klip arrives back home, and he's this sort of jolly, and there's actually a very good illustration. I really like this one, of them all meeting Ku-Klip. And he tells them, well, you see, you brought all your body parts with you, and I decided I wanted some help around here. And, so I found this meat glue that had been in the house of the Wicked Witch of the East, and, I just reassembled. I didn't have enough parts of all of you to make you whole again, so I just sort of Frankensteined you together, and named him Chopfit, for Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter. So I guess technically it's Chop Fight, but I call him Chopfit. Well, Chopfit was always out of sorts and didn't feel like he was a complete person. He also has a tin arm because he didn't have enough arms to go around. And he has Fighter's head, since obviously Nick Chopper's is in a cabinet. This whole thing is just a little on the disturbing side, and I'm a little surprised Riley and Lee didn't go, hey Frank, we might want to tone this one down a little. Whatever. So because he was out of sorts and didn't really feel like one specific way, Ku-Klip dismissed him. And so they then, and he doesn't, they do ask him if he knows where Nimmy Amy is, and he said, well, after the witch died, she moved away. We don't know where she went, but she went towards Mount Munch, was what I had heard. So they head off towards Mount Munch, and they first encounter an invisible country where they can see the grass, but they can't see anything else. And there's this strange beast called the hippo giraffe, that eats straw that starts sort of chasing them. Well, of course, they come out on the other side, and they can see the hippo giraffe, who's actually really kind of cute. There's also a very, very, very large ditch that they can't cross. And so the hippo giraffe says, well, if you'll let me eat the scarecrow's straw, then I'll let you ride across the ditch, because I have a really long neck that can extend over it. And so they agree, and they immediately stuff the scarecrow with hay once they find some hay. And he's all wobbly and weird, and unfortunately so they kind of have to help him along the rest until they come across their next house, which is the House of the Swines. Oh, here's Polychrome writing over on the hippo giraffe. They discover, and here's the Misshapen Scarecrow. Neil's got some great illustrations in this. So they encounter this family of swine who allow them to stay that night in their barn, essentially, and they're anthropomorphic pigs. They also allow them to use their straw pile to restuff the Scarecrow. So he's good as new again. And the next day they set out and find this house. But as they try to get close to it, they hit a wall of air. Well, this adorable blue rabbit tells them, oh, Nimmy Amy lives there, and she doesn't want visitors. But I've burrowed a hole under here, so you're welcome to use my hole to get through. So Polychrome shrinks them, lets them through the hole, they regrow themselves, and they meet Nimmy Amy. And Nimmy Amy at first is very surprised by all this, and they both the Tin Soldier and the Tin Woodman are trying to propose to her because they were both supposed to marry her before these things befell them. I think I forgot to tell you all that earlier. Tin Soldier was rusted, had gone to on the day he was going to go marry Nimmy Amy. And he has a heart, but it's a tin heart. So he also doesn't really love her. So Nimmy Amy's like, and she's now married to Chopfit, of course. And Chopfit's kind of a jerk, and Nimmy Amy isn't his biggest fan, but she says, I would marry you, but I've got him trained, and it would just take too long to train you, and I'm just gonna live with him. It's just easier that way. You don't really want to marry me, you're not really in love with me. Let's just go our own ways. Again, very feminist and modern. And we see that throughout the entire thing. The boys basically can't do anything, but Polychrome uses her magic, Ozma uses her magic, Mrs. Yoop uses her magic. I mean, it's very much, again, the women are in charge. And I see nothing wrong with that. So they return on the other side of the wall through the tunnel. A rainbow appears and Polychrome returns home. They all return to their respective homes. Ozma becomes concerned that Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter might have problems, so she sends Captain Fighter to the Gilligan country to patrol there as part of the Army of Oz, and that's the last we hear of him. And basically everything goes back to the way it was. The end. The book itself is... I really enjoyed it. I love the feminist aspect of it. I love the fun elements of magic. It's nice to see Ginger show back up. So it has a lot of lovely elements of the nostalgia factor of the first book with its own nuances and new elements. I think it's why it's remained one of the more popular ones. There is a Disney version, not version per se, but there's a Disney book and record version, that's narrated by Ray Bolger, I believe. There was also, and I should have grabbed this, pardon me. I'm trapped. There was also a Little Golden Book version. With pictures by Harry McNaught that condenses some of it. You get the Yoop. You get the hippo giraffe. There's the hippo giraffe. I love Harry McNaught's illustrations. They're just so fun in 1960s. Mrs. Yoop looking extremely different from how Neil illustrates her, because she's a giantess, but she's beautiful. Let's see, where's a good picture of this? Yeah. So there's Mrs. Yoop according to Neil. But there's no Woot the Wanderer. There's no Nimmy Amy. They just decide to go on an adventure, and then Ozma restores them. The end. So it's a very condensed adaptation. The book itself, so you've got that one that's out there. I don't have access to my LPs, so I can't show you the other one. Some of the interesting things to Tin Woodman of Oz that we'll come to after that I'll throw out there. You know, we've got the very feminist aspects of it, with everyone having the magic, them all having the magic, and the men basically not being able to do anything. And even in her transformed form, Polychrome is still able to do magic and save them from the Jaguar. This one's rather interesting because it was first originally going to be called The Twin Tin Woodman of Oz, so obviously the change to Captain Fighter must have come later, in a later draft. But the full manuscript exists. Tommy Quickstep isn't there, and the Swines aren't there. And their chapters are held, I believe Yale has the Tommy Quickstep chapter, and then I've been told the Swine chapter is in a private collection. But I want to say it's Texas State University actually has the manuscript for Tin Woodman, the full manuscript. And you can just go down and look at it. So eventually I plan to do that. Because it's not that far, and that'd be kind of cool. But the book basically didn't change a whole lot. So you've got that. Now, continuing the interesting feminist aspects, and we'll talk about continuity in a second. The book was the first one when Riley and Lee decided to try and reinvigorate the Oz series. Very briefly, they hired Dale Ulray to be the illustrator. Now, Dale Ulray, who I think I've talked a little bit about here and there. She was actually from this area. She was from Richardson, Texas. She was a comics illustrator. If I want to say something like Mary Hart, it wasn't Mary Hart, but it was something along that lines. So they hired her, and the first one she did was Tin Woodman of Oz. And there are some of her illustrations that are very similar, but not all of them. So you've got, here's her Tommy Quickstep. Let's see, where's her Mrs. Yoop? Her Mrs. Yoop. Dorothy and Ozma. Ozma is definitely older here by far than Dorothy. She was the first one to really push that idea of a much older Ozma, which is one I'm carrying through in mind, but I'll get to that in a moment. Her Tin Woodman discovering the head is significantly less traumatic. They're very 1950s illustrations. But she does some very fun things. Here's the Invisible Country. And it sold fairly well, and I think the intent was that she would re-illustrate the entire series. She next did an edition of Wizard, and that was it. She started Ozma of Oz, but the sales of Tin Woodman, I guess, were not good enough. And then the fact that it was the only edition of Wizard Riley and Lee published was, at least of the book in full, is hers. So hers did stick around for a while. But they didn't catch on. It didn't reinvigorate the series in the way that I think Riley and Lee expected them to. But her Tin Woodman stayed in print. It went as far as the Roycroft covers. So there's the Roycroft cover. There we go. with a very Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer-y Woot the Wanderer. And that was sort of it. So you've got, again, the first female... Well, not the first female. Evelyn Kobelman is really the first. But the first one intended to take the series farther was a female. So that carries through some of the ideas of Baum. Tin Woodman would be the last book Baum would see published in his lifetime. Because I believe he died before Magic of Oz was printed. Let's see, hang on, I can tell you in a sec. Yeah, he died in May, and Magic of Oz wasn't released until June. So this was the last one. So fortunately, he got to see this. Got to have a big hit with the series before he left us. Even though there are 2 more books still to come that are written by Baum. So next month is The Magic of Oz. This one was one this is the last of the Baum books that I've actually read. I enjoyed it a lot when I read it at the time. But I haven't read it since. So I've got a post-35 edition in green. It's inscribed 41 or 45, which doesn't totally surprise me given how vibrant the cover is. Colors seem to amp up after the war. So this is the next to last of the Baum books. This one has had a couple of personally colored illustrations by the original owner. But that's okay. That gives it a little charm. It's also my only copy of Magic of Oz, so I don't get another choice there. So next month we will definitely be reading The Magic of Oz. And after that is Glinda of Oz, and then we get to start Ruth Plumley Thompson, which I'm actually I'm looking forward to. Okay, so that being said, Lark Laughing asked a couple of questions in my of me in my last video, so I'll take a chance to address those. First, she asked me what the blue book I reference is. The blue book is The Book Collector's Guide to L. Frank Baum and Oz by Paul R. Bienvenu, with Robert E. Schmidt. It's a fabulous book. Now, you don't get as much of it before the Thompson books, but you do get... It explains how to use the book. It breaks down all the different editions and how you tell which one is which. It obviously... And they go up through the white editions. Because after the white editions, it just sort of wasn't necessary. You get the Del Rey set... and then you get the Books of Wonder set. Those are the last 2. Those are the 2, and the Dover set. Those are the 3 that have published all the Baum books. There's another one out there, but I don't have any of that series. And then just multitudes upon multitudes upon multitudes of editions of Wizard. Which I've got many of. So he stops with the white editions. I wish he had pushed on a little farther, but that's okay. But before each of the Baum sections, you get discussion of the book itself. Usually you get a review or two. If there's interesting tidbits, interesting sort of, well, we know this was planned, but instead of that happening, this happened instead, like I did with Lost Princess. That was the one that had a lot of information. That's where I've gotten it from. And some of it also has been Wikipedia, some of it's been some other articles where it's just stuff I've glommed into my memory. So that's the book. She also wanted to hear more about my revisions, and who my cohorts were, and publishing, so... To give more clarification, sort of what we talked about a little with Dale Ulray, Riley and Lee did try to reinvigorate the series, but they didn't do it in probably the smart way. You know, they did things like the Roycroft covers for some of the books. Other books got... stand up. Got covers by Dick Martin. And then other books just kept their original cover. They didn't get anything fancy. Weirdly, Emerald City of Oz, they never tried to go in and revise. And then TikTok of Oz had one that was out there. Like, they just ended up not using it. But Emerald City, was the only Baum book that did not at least sort of go down that road. And then a couple of the Thompson books have other covers. But that was kind of where they stopped. Then they went to the white editions, which were big sellers, and obviously because you find those fairly readily. But it was really Britain who liked the Oz series. Riley and Lee, they just didn't. And for whatever reason, they knew they were making money off of it, but they didn't like the series. And I know Ruth Plumley Thompson in interviews said that she came up with ideas for an animated series. I mean, all sorts of stuff to try and keep the series going. And they just didn't want to go there. Which subsequently is part of what allowed the MGM film to really take the hold it did. And go from there. Now, had the Oz books, and I think some of it was because Riley and Lee didn't own the rights to Wizard. That was Bob's Merrill. Had it been in the hands of, say, Whitman or Grosset and Dunlap, or, and I'm blanking, let me look this up real quick. I should know this part, but I don't. Who publishes the Nancy Drew books? Grosset and Dunlap, and also Simon and Schuster. So, had it been in, Grosset and Dunlap's hands, I think we would have seen I think the outcome of the Oz series would have gone much differently. There would have probably been a more set continuity. They would have done what they did to the Nancy Drew books in the 60s and again in the 90s, where they went in and they sort of modernized them. So that's kind of what we're doing here, is how do you present Oz to a modern audience without going the way of Dorothy Must Die or Wicked, where you're preserving the original while making it fresh. So some of that is with revisions to the writing, in terms of modernizing the writing, but it's not going to be, which she said, I'll miss Dorothy and Bellina being impertinent and impudent, because she was proud to know those words as a child. The vocabulary itself won't change. It's more sentence structure. It's more contractions where contractions didn't exist before because it wasn't considered proper. So it's going to be more modernizing that aspect of the language. Some of the dialogue will be as well, but not quite to that extent, where I'm going to be deleting big words. It'll be now outdated words, like in Wizard, they talk about, Baum uses the word greensword. No one uses that word anymore. No one. That's going to be one that'll go. Or that was one that did go. One of the things so there's that. I've done a lot of work trying to iron out a set history of Oz, if you will. And what I've ultimately decided is I'm going to take everything Baum gave me and coalesce it into one, and then anything after Balm will make fit somehow. It'll fit. One of the other things I'm doing is I'm trying to really bring out the feminist aspects of it, which is going to be one of the biggest challenges with Land of Oz. I did finish my first draft of Wizard, as well as my first round of revisions to Wizard. Mostly to make Dorothy more active, less passive. And to do things like, Balm was a big fan in the first book of having them remind us over and over again, I want a brain, I want heart. Stuff like that I got rid of. So there was streamlining, there's trimming. And just some general tightening of things. So that's really what's going on with that, with the revisions. So I'm working with, my illustrator is Sam Malazzo. He has a DeviantArt, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head. And he sent some rough sketches over for Wizard that are just phenomenal. We're still just in the character designing phase. And I'm also working with Walter Kruger. Although primarily it's me who's doing the writing, and I'm getting input from him. So there have been people that I've been bouncing ideas off of. And one of the things that I toyed with was bringing Dorothy into the Land of Oz, into the second book. I ultimately decided against it, but mostly because there was no way to really bring her to Oz that wouldn't be ridiculous. So that's kind of what's going on. We don't have a publisher. We haven't gotten that far yet. First, we've got to get the books, illustrated, fine-tuned, and ready to go. What I would like to do if we take it to a publisher, versus try to do it ourselves, versus ebooks, and that's the other thing, is how do we get these to kids? I'd like to go at it with at least the first 2, probably 3 books. The first 2 books is definitely 100% finished and ready to go, with the third one and probably the fourth one on their ways. So there we go. I hope that sort of explains and gives you more insight. If you have more questions, please feel free to throw them. I always love reading everyone's feedback. I love reading your comments. I know I need to get back to doing the blog. That's fallen by the wayside, and I need to pick that back up again. So, that all being said, that's it for me. I'll see you next month for The Magic of Oz. So, have a good one.